Josh. I'm here with
and
Lou.
and I'm Colin, and we're gonna have some fun. We're gonna talk about the Olivet Discourse from a Preterist perspective today. So I'm just gonna kind of walk through the text a bit and explain what my view is, and you can ask me questions or what have you. So I'm actually gonna start in Matthew 23 instead of
Mhm.
Matthew 24 because I think that the context here really lends itself to understanding what the next chapter is about. So this is Matthew chapter 23. Then Jesus said to the crowds and to his disciples, "The scribes and the Pharisees sit on Moses' seat. So do and observe whatever they tell you, but not the works that they do. For they preach, but they do not practice. They tie up heavy burdens, hard to bear, and lay them on people's shoulders, but they themselves are not willing to move them with their finger. They do all their deeds to be seen by others, for they make their phylacteries broad and their fringes long. And they love the place of honor at feasts and the best seat in the synagogues, and greetings in the marketplace, and being called rabbi by others. But you are not to be called rabbi, for you have one teacher, and you are all brothers. But you are not to be called rabbi, for you have one teacher, and you are all brothers. Oh, I just read that. Sorry. And call no man your father on earth, for you have one Father who is in heaven. Neither be called instructors, for you have one instructor, the Christ. The greatest among you shall be servant. Whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted. But woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you shut the kingdom of heaven in people's faces. For you neither enter yourselves, nor allow those who would enter to go in. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you travel across the sea and land to make a single proselyte, and when he becomes a proselyte, you make him twice as much a child of hell as yourself. Woe to you, blind guides, who say, if anyone swears by the temple, it is nothing, but if anyone swears by the gold in the temple, he is bound by oath. You blind fools, for which is greater, the gold or the temple that has made the gold sacred? And and you say, if anyone swears by the altar, it is nothing, but if anyone swears by the gift that is on the altar, he is bound by oath. You blind men, for which is greater, the gift of the altar, the gift, or the altar that makes it the gift sacred? So whoever swears by the altar swears by it and by everything on it, and whoever swears by the temple swears by it and by him who dwells in it, and whoever swears by heaven swears by the throne of God and by him who sits upon it. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you tithe the mint and dill and cumin, and have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. These you ought to have done without neglecting the others. You blind guides, strain out a gnat and swallow a camel. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you clean the outside of the cup and the plate, but inside they are full of greed and self-indulgence. You blind Pharisee, first clean the inside of the cup and the plate, that the outside also may be clean. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you are like whitewashed tombs, which outwardly appear beautiful, but within are full of dead people's bones and all uncleanness, so that you also outwardly appear righteous to others, but within you are full of hypocrisy and lawlessness. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you build the tombs of the prophets and decorate the monuments of the righteous, saying, if we had lived in the days of our father, we would not have taken part with them in the shedding of the blood of the prophets. Thus you witness against yourselves that you are sons of those who murdered the prophets. Fill up then the measure of your fathers, you serpents, you brood of vipers. How are you to escape being sentenced to hell? Therefore I send you prophets and wise men and scribes, some of whom you will kill and crucify, some you will flog in your synagogues and persecute from town to town, so that on you may come all the righteous blood shed on earth, from the blood of the righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah the son of Berechiah, whom you murdered between the sanctuary and the altar. Truly I say to you, all these things will come upon this generation. O
Mhm.
Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it, how often I would have gathered your children as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you were not willing. See, your house is left to you desolate, for I tell you, you will not see me until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. So up until this point in time, I think we can agree that Jesus is primarily lambasting the Pharisees for their hypocrisy. And he actually prophesies to them that he's going to send to them prophets, wise men, and scribes, and that those prophets, wise men, and scribes are going to be killed and crucified and persecuted from town to town. And that is actually going to be that will be filling up the measure of their fathers, which was the killing of the prophets, and the judgment for their blood, for the blood of those prophets, will come upon them. And that's why he says, truly, truly, I say to you, all these things will come upon this generation. He's talking about the scribes and Pharisees who were doing this hypocrisy and who would do this persecution. And that's why he says, see, your house is left to you desolate. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, like he's talking about like the 7 woes or.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So that's the 7 woes to the scribes and Pharisees. So now I'm going to move into chapter 24. So that's the context for what we're talking about here. So Jesus had just lambasted the Pharisees, and then here's chapter 24. Jesus left the temple and was going away when his disciples came to point out to him the buildings of the temple. Because remember, he just said, your house will be left to you desolate, to the scribes and Pharisees. So that would be the temple that he was talking about. But he answered them, you see all these things, do you not? Truly I say to you, there will not be here left one stone upon another that will not be thrown down. So he's talking about, he's prophesying the destruction of the temple, right?
Yeah.
And as he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, tell us, when will these things be? So at this point in time, what is the primary focus of their question?
The temple, because they're kind of, seems like they're freaking out about what's going on. Like, they heard Jesus say that, your guys gonna get, your house is gonna be destroyed. Then he said that it's not a single stone will be knocked down from this building or this temple.
Exactly. Yeah. So
it seemed like they're probably pretty concerned what's going to happen.
Yeah, exactly. So they want to know, okay, when is that going to happen? Because the temple's been here for quite a long time, right? But then they also ask 2 other questions. And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? And so just to give you a little bit of background information into what Jewish eschatology was, is they saw the coming of the Messiah, his enthronement on the throne of David, and his reign as the end of history. So they thought that was going to be like ushering in the eternal state. They misunderstood, and so Jesus clarifies. They thought they were all one unified thing. So when they said, when will these things be, they're saying, wait, why are you saying the temple's going to be destroyed? You're not sitting on the throne yet, right? So what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? And Jesus answered them, see that no one leads you astray, for many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and they will lead many astray. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not alarmed, for this must take place, but the end is not yet. So what end is he talking about? He's still referring to the end of the temple, because that was what their question was about. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines, earthquakes in various places. All these are but the beginning of the birth pains. Then they will deliver you up to tribulation and put you to death. Remember, Jesus had just prophesied that to the Pharisees moments before when he was in the temple. He said that he would send to them wise prophets and wise men that they would kill and persecute in the synagogues. So they will deliver you up to tribulation and put you to death, that you will be hated by all nations for my sake. And then many will fall away and betray one another and hate one another. Many false prophets will arise and lead many astray, and because lawlessness will be increased, the love of many will grow cold. But the one who endures to the end will be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be proclaimed through the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. Now again, what end is he talking about?
In verse 14?
Yeah.
I'm going to say the end of the actual, not Jerusalem, but actually age, because 70 AD, I don't think the whole gospel is proclaimed throughout the world. I don't think that America's had the gospel at that time. So it seems like he's implying the actual world, not Jerusalem.
And you would think that by reading the English, because it's a little bit deceiving. So where it says the whole world, that word is actually not cosmos, as you might suspect. The word world in English is usually translated from the Greek cosmos, which it could mean many things, but it means generally like the created order, the planet, the people on the planet, both Jew and Gentile alike, the wicked world. Those are all different meanings of that. But this specific world that's used here, that's actually rendered the whole world, is translated from one word in Greek, oikumene. And this word oikumene actually means inhabited earth or inhabited land, and is used in the New Testament primarily to refer to the Roman Empire. So it's what they would view as the world, not the entire planet.
Yeah,
And an example of that is Luke chapter 2 verse 1, where it says, in those days a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be registered. Now, clearly Caesar Augustus did not put out a decree that the entire planet should be registered, because that was not the extent of his rule. But the word here, again, is oikumene, so it's referring primarily to the Roman world. And in fact, Paul confirms on several occasions that the gospel had been preached to the entire world, as far as they were concerned, not the whole planet, but the whole Roman world. So I'm going to go over to Romans, I believe it's chapter 16, and okay, so I'm going to start in verse 25. Now to him who is able to strengthen you according to my gospel and the preaching of Jesus Christ according to the revelation of the mystery that was kept secret for long ages, but has now been disclosed and through the prophetic writings has been made known to all nations, according to the command of the eternal God to bring about the obedience of faith. To the only wise God be glory forevermore through Jesus Christ. Amen. So he believed that the gospel had been preached to all nations. And now this term all nations, again, refers to the nations surrounding Israel. And so that's what he meant by that. But he also says something even more fascinating in Colossians chapter 1. If I can find it here really quick. Okay, so I'm going to be I'll start in verse 21. And you who once were alienated and hostile in mind, doing evil deeds, he is now reconciled in his body of flesh by his death, in order to present you holy and blameless and above reproach before him, if indeed you continue in the faith, stable and steadfast, not shifting from the hope of the gospel that you heard. Now notice what he says, which has been proclaimed in all creation under heaven. Now, clearly that's hyperbole, because we understand that he doesn't mean the entire planet. But you see that he uses that same sort of terminology as is spoken of here in Matthew 24, that the gospel of the kingdom will be proclaimed through the whole world as a testimony to all nations. So Paul says both to all nations and all creation.
Where does he say all creation? What verse is it?
That was Colossians. Let me see if I can pull it up again. I just closed that tab. It was Colossians chapter 1, and I think it was verse 23. Let me pull it up real quick to make sure.
Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah, it is.
Yeah, it is in 23.
Continue in faith, stable and steadfast, not shifting from the hope of the gospel that you heard, which has been proclaimed in all creation under heaven.
Yeah.
Which I, Paul, became a minister.
Exactly. Yeah, that's right. And so that's our understanding of what is referred to here, because up until this point he was talking about the end of the temple and the things that would happen leading up to the end of the temple. And all of these things are actually confirmed to have happened, right? We know that the disciples that he was speaking to actually suffered persecution, just like Jesus foretold. Not only did they suffer persecution, those nation rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom, there were various rebellions throughout the Roman Empire between 30 and 70 AD. There were the famine in Jerusalem was said by Josephus to be so bad that women were boiling their children to eat and offering them to soldiers passing by.
Yeah, that's not very nice.
Yeah, it's horrible. Well, I mean, the famine was that bad that they were that desperate that they would kill their own children. And there are several earthquakes even mentioned in the book of Acts. So we know that these things were happening leading up to the destruction of the temple, and since that's the primary question that they were asking and the primary focus of the end of the last chapter for telling that judgment would come upon the scribes and Pharisees, we have to understand that really is the end that he's speaking of, because if that's the end that he's talking about prior to verse 14, it makes the most sense to think that that's the same end that he's talking about in verse 14. And then he says, so when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let the one who is on the housetop not go down to take what is in his house, and let the one who is in the field not turn back to take his clothes. And alas for women who are pregnant, and for those who are nursing infants in those days. Pray that your flight may not be in winter or on a Sabbath, for then there will be great tribulation, such as not been from the beginning of the world until now, no, and never will be. And in those days, if those days had not been cut short, no human would be saved. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be cut short. Then if anyone says to you, look, here is the Christ, or there he is, do not believe it. For false Christs and false prophets will arise and perform great signs and wonders, so as to lead astray, if possible, even the elect. See, I have told you beforehand. So if they say to you, look, he is in the wilderness, do not go out. And if they say, look, he's in the inner rooms, do not believe it. For as lightning comes from the east and shines as far as the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. Wherever the corpse is, there the vultures will gather. Now this section, most people who read it and are not familiar with the preterist perspective believe that this is talking about something in the very distant future. Yeah. But the fascinating thing is that if we look at the parallel passage in Luke chapter 21, where he's talking about the same, things leading up to it here, my focus is verse 20, but I'm going to start just a little bit before that so you can see. I'm going to start in verse 10. Then he said, nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in various places, famines and pestilence, and there will be terrors and great signs in the heaven. So you understand he's talking about the same sort of thing he was talking about in Matthew chapter 24. But before all this, they will lay your hands on you and persecute you, delivering you up to the synagogues and prisons, and you will be brought before kings and governors for my name's sake. This will be your opportunity to bear witness. Settle it therefore in your mind not to meditate beforehand how to answer, for I will give you a mouth and wisdom which none of your adversaries will be able to withstand or contradict. You will be delivered up by parents and brothers, relatives and friends, and some of you they will put to death. You'll be hated by all for my name's sake, but not a hair of your head will perish. By your endurance you'll gain your lives. So you understand that he's talking about the same passage. This is this parallel passage. You're talking about the same thing, and then instead of saying, when you see the abomination of desolation, this is what Luke says, because Matthew's writing to Jewish people primarily, and so they would have the background and understanding of the Old Testament to understand what he was talking about when he said the abomination of desolation. So he didn't have to explain it to them, but Luke is writing to Theophilus, a Gentile, who may not have the background and understanding of the Old Testament. So rather than confusing him by quoting something from the Old Testament as Jesus actually did, he, instead of recording what Jesus said verbatim, explains what Jesus said in a way that he would be able to understand. And this is what he says instead of abomination of desolation. But when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know that its desolation has come near. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let those who are inside the city depart, and let not those who are out in the country enter it. For these are the days of vengeance, to fulfill all that is written. Alas for women who are pregnant, and for those nursing infants in those days, for there will be great distress upon the earth and wrath against this people. They will fall by the edge of the sword and be led captive among all nations, and Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles are fulfilled. So Luke 21 is very clear that there was this specific attack on Jerusalem. Mm-hmm. And that's why he says, let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. If this were something that were happening all over the entire planet, yeah, fleeing to the mountains near Judea would not help anybody. And especially if here I am in Southern California, so when I see the abomination of desolation, I jump on a plane, fly to Judea, and then go to the mountains. Like that, it doesn't make sense to be
Yeah.
talking about a worldwide persecution. This is something that was happened specifically in the region of Judea. Hence why the command for those who are in Judea to flee to the mountains.
And I listened to this pastor on Sermon Audio. You know that website, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Sermon Audio, and another thing he pointed is said pray that your flight may not be in winter on a Sabbath.
Right.
Why would someone outside Israel be concerned about the Sabbath? It doesn't really make much sense.
Right. Because there were actually still laws concerning the distance you were permitted to move on the Sabbath. Yeah. So if your flight were on a Sabbath, you wouldn't be able to actually leave town.
Yeah, because I haven't believed that 15 to 20 at least. I haven't believed that was a future event since I was a dispensationalist, and I got rid of that like at least 3 years ago now. About 3 years.
Oh, cool. Very cool.
Yeah, I always, well, not always, but since rejecting dispensationalism, I believe that a temple being said not one stone being knocked over it happened 70 AD. Like when I was a dispensationalist, I thought this was all in the future, just because I was just told that. And when I started doing some research on it, I realized, yeah, this stuff is nonsense. You gotta admit, it's kind of silly to believe that the temple is going to be rebuilt, like God's going to go back to a shadow and then knock it down again. You think that's kind of silly to think that way?
Right. Yeah. I don't think that that's really what's happening here. And since it's talking about, and actually a fascinating thing is that most people, even dispensationalists, recognize that the abomination of desolation, whatever it is, has something to do with the temple. But when Jesus spoke these words, there was a temple standing. Now there's not a temple standing. How could it be talking about the desolation of a temple which has already been destroyed? But we'll get into more of that if you have some questions. Some people have a difficulty understanding when it says, "For there will be great tribulation, such has not been from the beginning of the world until now, no, and never will be." And Luke 21 actually records it a little bit differently, because I believe that that is actually a Hebraic expression or hyperbole. And the reason for that is, I'll show you in a minute, but I'm just going to read what Luke records instead. "For there will be great distress upon the land and wrath against this people." That's how he explains what Matthew said. So Luke, again, writing to a Gentile, didn't want to confuse him by using Hebraic terminology. And the fascinating thing is that phrase, the like of which I will never do again, that sort of terminology is the same stuff that is used throughout the Old Testament prophets. Whenever God was judging a nation, and particularly when he's judging Israel for being rebellious, he says, "I will do among you what I've never done before, and the likes of which I will never do again." And in fact, the same sort of expression is used in other completely different contexts, which we can very clearly define as hyperbole. So for example, who was the greatest king in Israel, or the most righteous king in Israel?
Jesus.
Now that's what I would say, right?
Yeah.
But the fascinating thing is that the Old Testament records something a little bit different. Now, who else do you think might be said of is the best king of Israel, or the most righteous king?
Okay, like back before Jesus was physically born?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. I forgot. I'm not good with the Old Testament kings' names. Was it Jehoiakim or something like that? I don't know.
That's a really good guess, but it's not Jehoiakim. Some people think that they would say, oh, well, it's probably David, right? David was a really good king, right? Or maybe Solomon, although Solomon wasn't really righteous, so probably David. David would be the most likely explanation for the ones who are. He would be the most likely candidate for the most righteous king.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, that makes sense, because he made a covenant with David that the Messiah would come through his line.
Right, and so the fascinating thing about that is, I'm going to pull up a couple verses here to show you what I'm talking about. Let's see.
The one question I have is, I'm not really an expert on Old Testament kings. Was Jehoiakim even a righteous king? I can't really
I
remember.
don't believe he was.
Yeah,
But their names all sound so similar sometimes.
yeah, that's why I'm like, I just remember Jehoiakim. There was Jehoiakim, Jehoiada. There was one that was he was like a king that was very young, but
So
said that he
here,
was
here I found the passages I was looking for.
okay.
So in 2 Kings 18 verse 5, he, speaking of Hezekiah the king, he trusted in the Lord God of Israel, so that after him was none like him among all the kings of Judah, nor who were before him. Now
Okay.
here's 2 Kings chapter 23 verse 25. So this is 5 chapters later. Now before him, this is Josiah now. It's talking about Josiah. Now before him there was no king like him, who turned to the Lord with all his heart and soul and with all his might according to the law of Moses, nor after him did any arise like him. How can Hezekiah and Josiah both be the most devoted?
They're both it's a hyperbole. Like
Exactly, yeah. And now
yeah,
here's
it's
here
too
here
many.
are some other examples from the Old Testament. Exodus 10 verse 14. And the locusts went up over the land of Egypt and rested on the territory of Egypt, and they were very severe. Previously there had been no such locusts as they, nor shall there be after them. Here's Exodus 11:6. Then there shall be a great cry throughout the land of Egypt, such as was not like it before, nor shall be like it again. That was a different judgment. Here's Ezekiel 5:9. And I will do among you what I've never done before, and the like of which I will never do again because of all your abominations. That was judgment upon Israel for being rebellious. Daniel 9:12. And he has confirmed his words which he spoke against us and against our judges who judged us, and bringing upon us a greater disaster, for under the whole heaven such has never been done as what has been done to Jerusalem. And that was talking about the last time the temple was destroyed, before AD 70. And then here again in Daniel 12:1, at that time Michael shall stand up, the great prince who stands watch over the sons of the people, and there shall be a time of trouble, such as this never was like there, such as never was since there was a nation, even to that time, and at that time your people shall be delivered. So the problem is understanding that like all of those things are not referring to the same event. So how can they all be the worst? They can't. It's
No,
clear
I
hyperbole. Yeah. So then when we see that same, there will be great tribulation such as never been before, never will be again. That's the same sort of terminology. And
also should probably point out it doesn't say there'll be a great evil 7 year tribulation with a big scary antichrist gonna come and get you.
yeah, it actually doesn't speak about the antichrist in this passage, which is
Yeah.
fascinating. Although some people would say that the abomination of desolation actually was the sacrifices continued to be offered in the temple after Jesus had offered his sacrifice on the cross, because it would be a profanation of the altar to offer sacrifices, which, whoa, sorry, I lost my screen for a sec there. It would be a profanation of the altar to offer sacrifices after Jesus had offered his sacrifice. So some people would say that that's what the abomination of desolation was, and that's why the temple was destroyed. So like other people would say that it was the zealots taking over the temple, and they actually killed people and blood ran through the temple. There are a couple other interpretations, but I think the one concerning the sacrifices seems the most logical, since that's what would profane the altar, so it would be an abominable sacrifice. Now here's the fascinating thing. So if you agree with me that everything up until this point in time is talking about the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD, then this next part is going to be a problem for anyone who thinks of that this is talking about future events. Because in verse 29 it says, immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light, the stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of heaven will be shaken. So immediately after the tribulation, something big is going to happen, right? Now, people who take this literally obviously understand it to being referring to the destruction of the created order, which I don't believe makes sense. And the reason that I believe that is because I think I'm going to go to Isaiah 13. this is Isaiah chapter 13, and verse 1 says, "The oracle concerning Babylon, which Isaiah the son of Amos saw." So this is concerning Babylon, and I'm going to actually jump down for a minute to verse 17 to be clear about what exactly he was talking about. Verse 17 says, "Behold, I am stirring up the Medes against them, who have no regard for silver and no delight in gold." So this is when the Medes conquered Babylon, which already happened hundreds of years before Jesus even came.
Yeah.
So I'm going to jump into the middle of this. Okay, I'm going to start in verse 4, actually. No, I'm sorry, 6, verse 6. "Wail, for the day of the Lord is near. As the destruction from the Almighty it will come. Therefore all hands will be feeble, and every human heart will melt. They will be dismayed, pangs and agony will seize them, and they will anguish like a woman in labor, and they will look aghast at one another, and their faces will be aflame. Behold, the day of the Lord comes, cruel with wrath and fierce anger, to make the land a desolation and destroy its sinners from it." Now you agree that at this point in time he's talking about the destruction of Babylon. And then in verse 10 it says, "For the stars of the heavens and their constellations will not give their light. The sun will be dark at its rising, and the moon will not shed its light." A couple verses later in verse 13 he goes on to say, "Therefore I will make the heavens tremble, and the earth will be shaken out of its place at the wrath of the Lord of hosts in the day of his fierce anger." So clearly, whatever these things mean, it's not literal. It's talking about the destruction of a nation, not the destruction of the created order.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah,
so what I think this means is I believe that the sun, moon, and stars refer to people, just like in Joseph's dream. So if you're familiar with Joseph's dream that he had of the sun, moon, and stars bowing down before him, in the passage where he explains the dream to his family, and immediately his brothers say, "How do you think that we will bow down before you?" He didn't explain it to them. He didn't say, "Well, this means that you guys are going to bow down before me." He just says, "I had a dream that the sun, moon, and 11 stars bowed down before me." And they said, "Why do you think we're going to bow down before you?" Because they understood that the prophetic vision that he had was concerning people. And I think that the sun, moon, and stars, being the greatest lights of the sky, being destroyed, is a picture of the destruction of rulers in the land. And now, since this destruction is coming upon Jerusalem, I think the sun, moon, and stars is referring to the scribes and Pharisees, which Jesus had previously told would be judged for the blood of the prophets. Then verse 30 says, "Then will appear in heaven the sign of the Son of Man. And then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory." Now, this is not a very accurate translation, which is unfortunate. The Greek word order reads this way. It says, "Then will appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven." So to put the word "in heaven" before the phrase "the sign, the Son of Man" is to interpret that they're seeing the sign of the Son of Man in the sky. It's something that they're actually seeing show up in the sky. But rather, it says, "Then will appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven." The sign is that the Son of Man is in heaven, rather than a sign in heaven of the Son of Man, if that makes sense.
How does the ordering change the meaning of it, though?
Well, let me read it to you. Let me read it to you both ways and see if you can understand. "Then will appear in heaven the sign of the Son of Man." What's in heaven? The sign or the Son of Man?
Okay.
The sign. Then will appear in heaven the sign. Means it seems like it's saying that the sign is in heaven, but the Greek word order is, "Then will appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven." And so I'm saying that in heaven is a designation for where the Son of Man is, not where the sign is appearing, if that makes sense.
Okay, so all right. So you're saying what it should say is just the sign is in heaven, not the Son of Man or Jesus himself.
No, the sign is not in heaven.
Okay.
The sign is that the Son of Man is in heaven. Then will appear the sign of the Son of Man, and the Son of Man is in heaven. So it's the sign that the Son of Man is in heaven, rather than the sign in heaven. Because remember, one of their other questions was, what will be the sign of your coming?
Mm-hmm.
He's explaining that here. Then will appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven. The sign is that the Son of Man is in heaven, rather than something that you see in heaven. And then all the tribes of the earth will mourn. Now, this is a confusing translation as well, because it seems like it's talking about people all over the planet. But the word earth in Greek is ge, and can also be translated dirt or land. And I think in this case it makes the most sense to say tribes of the land, particularly because the word tribes is only ever used of the people of Israel. So it's talking about the Jews in the land of Israel. Rather, if it were talking about people all over the planet, it would use another word like nations or peoples rather than tribes. The word tribes is used specifically to refer to the 12 tribes of Israel.
Yeah.
So I'll read you my translation, which it's just an alternative. Then will appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and then all the tribes of the land will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on clouds of heaven with power and great glory. Now, at this point in time, it gets confusing, because if you understand that up until this point he's talking about the destruction of Jerusalem, you're like, wait, but what about the coming of the... I thought the coming was the end of the age, right?
Yeah.
And so let me jump over to, I'm going to go to Daniel chapter 7, because this is actually a quotation, which is why Matthew just says it, because he understands that his audience is going to know what he's talking about when he says, then will appear the son, then you will see the sign of then they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. So here is Daniel chapter 7, verse 13 and 14. And I saw in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven there came one like a son of man, and he came to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. Now, at what point in time in history does the Son of Man come to the Ancient of Days? And the New American Standard actually translates it this way. And behold, with the clouds of heaven there came one like a son of man, and he came up to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. At what point in time in history did Jesus come up to the Father?
Oh, when he ascended into heaven after his resurrection?
Exactly. And when he ascended into heaven after his resurrection, what took him away to heaven? Do you remember?
Yeah, what's the question again?
When he ascended, what was it that took him away into heaven? What did they see? What did they see him leaving on?
I can't remember. What was it?
I'll go to Acts chapter 1 and read this for you, because it will make sense. And while they were gazing into heaven, oh, sorry, back up a little bit. And when he had said these things, as they were looking on, he was lifted up, and a cloud took him out of their sight.
Yeah, that's right. I remember now.
So Jesus goes up to the Father on a cloud. So behold, with the clouds of heaven there came one like a son of man, and he came up to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed. So this is not, in the original context, this is not Jesus descending from heaven to judge the world. This is Jesus ascending to heaven to sit on his throne and rule over his kingdom. So when it says that they, again, and if you read through this passage in Matthew chapter 24, up until this point in time, he says you most of the time, talking to the disciples, saying they will deliver you up to tribulation, and you, over and over again. And now he says, then will appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and then all the tribes of the land will mourn, and they, speaking of the tribes of the land, the people of Israel who are being judged, hence why they're mourning, then they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. So rather than this saying that they are visibly seeing with their eyes that Jesus is ascending to heaven, because obviously that had already happened 40 years beforehand, so they can't be seeing that with their eyes. Rather, this is them understanding that he is the Messiah and King, and that he is ruling. because what they did, specifically the scribes and Pharisees, remember, so we're talking about apostate Jews. They actually rejected Jesus as Messiah. So then seeing him come, understanding that he's coming on the clouds of heaven, is understanding that he was the Messiah. And so this sign that the Son of Man is in heaven is the sign that Jesus has ascended to heaven on a cloud with great power and glory, right? So this is them understanding that they were wrong. And the reason that they're understanding that they're wrong is because he prophesied against them that their temple would be destroyed and that they would they would receive judgment for the blood of the prophets. And that is what I believe the sign of the Son of Man in heaven was the destruction of the temple. And then verse 31, and he will send out his angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the four winds from one end of the heaven to the other. This is a common verse used by dispensationalists to try to talk about the rapture, which is fascinating because usually they're pre-trib rapture, and this would be not pre-trib. This would be at the end of the tribulation. But so that's the problem with that. But obviously, we're going to talk about what it means if it's talking about the destruction of Jerusalem. And he will send out his angels. The word angels, angelos, is messengers. And the trumpet call, I believe to refer to the trumpets that were blasted the year of Jubilee, if you're familiar with that. So the Jubilee year would usher in a time of peace. Captives would be set free. So if you were in slavery because you had if you had to sell yourself into slavery to pay a debt, indentured servitude, you would be released at this time. And so it's a message of peace and victory, right? Prosperity, peace. So the gospel is that message of peace. So sending out his messengers with a loud trumpet call, speaking of that, he will gather his elect from the four winds from one end of heaven to another. The word gather there comes from the same word as synagogue, and it refers to a horizontal gathering of people rather than what dispensationalists think. It's a vertical gathering of people up. It's not a gathering up, it's a gathering in. And so I think the best. Sorry, say that again.
So it's kind of like people gathering at a church on Sunday.
Yes, gather. But so then the gathering of the elect, I believe, is the bringing of people into the kingdom, which is not a singular event, but rather something that happens until the end of history, right? So then when it says, and he will send out his angels, that's what happens immediately. And they will gather his elect is what comes after that. And so I think the best parallel, so this is in John chapter... let me see if I can find it. I think it's 11.
Yeah, he won't die just for this nation, but you'll gather...
Yeah, exactly. That's the passage that I'm going to.
Yeah, I think I know what you're talking about. Actually, I do know what you're talking about.
Okay, here we go. But one of them, Caiaphas, who is high priest that year, said to them, "You know nothing at all, nor do you understand that it is better for you that one man should die for the people, not that the whole nation should perish. He did not say this of his own accord, but being a high priest, that year he prophesied that Jesus would die for the nation, and not only for the nation, but also to gather, same word, into one, the children of God who are scattered abroad." So this is talking about the gospel then being free to spread, and in fact it was. The persecution of the Jews, or the persecution that the Christians suffered at the hands of the apostate Jews, was great, and they suppressed the gospel, and they actually utilized the Roman government to try to suppress the gospel. So after the destruction of the temple and the judgment upon those people, the gospel was able to spread even further and to continue to gather in the elect from the four winds. So then here's verse 32. From the fig tree learn its lesson. As soon as its branch becomes tender and puts out its leaves, you know that summer is near. So when you look at a fig tree and you see that it's getting ready to put out shoots on the leaf, like it's almost ready to blossom, you know that summer is near. That's like a sign that summer is near. So also when you see all these things, you know that he is near at the very gates. So he's saying that there's all of these signs, just like when you look at a tree beginning to put out leaves, you know that summer is near. So also when you see all these things, the destruction of Jerusalem, or all of the things leading up to the destruction of Jerusalem, you will know that he is near at the very gate. So he's saying, watch out for these signs, be vigilant, and heed the warning, right? And then here he says, "Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. Heaven and earth will not pass away, but my words will not pass away." Now, again, when he says this generation, there are many people who try to reinterpret that to say something different than what it actually says. But if you go back to chapter 23, when he was talking to the scribes and Pharisees, so that on you may come all the righteous blood shed on earth, from the blood of Abel to the blood of Zechariah the son of Berechiah, whom you murdered between the sanctuary and the altar. Truly I say to you, all these things will come upon this generation. Everybody agrees at that point that he's prophesying judgment on the Pharisees and scribes, not upon some future generation. So then when Jesus uses the same term again and says that this generation will not pass away, we have to understand that he's talking about the same thing. He's talking about the generation that he was speaking to. Then in verse 36, he says, "But concerning that day and hour, no one knows, not even the angels of heaven nor the Son, but the Father only." So now he's talking about the end of the age, because they had conflated the two ideas. They had thought that Jesus reigning was the consummation of history, and he's saying not yet. So up until this point in time, there have been signs and signs and signs and signs, and he's saying watch for these signs, look for these things. When you see these things, you'll know that he's near, right? And then all of a sudden he shifts and he says, "But concerning that day and hour, no one knows." So up until this point, he's been talking about a sign event, an event with a sign, many signs that you can see. And now he's talking about a signless event, the second advent at the end of history. So from that point on into chapter 25, I think he's talking about the second advent. But before that point in time, I think he's talking about the destruction of Jerusalem. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. There's one thing where I'm not sure is it says gather like from four winds from one end of heaven to the other. How is Israel one end of heaven to the other? That sounds like one side of the world to the other side of the world to me.
I think it's talking about from one side of the earth to the other side of the earth. But remember, I don't think that he's talking about preaching the gospel just in Jerusalem. I think that he's saying after the wicked Jews who were persecuting Christians are destroyed, then the gospel can spread to the whole world. And I mean the whole world as in the planet. But it's not a singular event. That's what happens throughout the course of history after that point.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's talking about gathering the elect from the whole world, it doesn't mean gather as like the rapture or resurrection.
Exactly. It's not an instantaneous thing. It's just that's what we do when we go across the ocean and preach the gospel. We are gathering the elect from the four winds.
Okay, I guess that makes sense.
So that's the Great Commission is what I think that's talking about.
Okay, so it's basically a different phrase of the Great Commission, basically.
Exactly.
Is this? I'm guessing this is a different meaning than First Thessalonians 4.
Yeah, 1 Thessalonians 4 is clearly talking about the resurrection.
Okay.
Right? So that's at the end. We realize that that's at the end of history. I think you're talking about, but we do not want you to be uninformed, brothers, about those who are falling asleep, that you may not grieve as others who have no hope. For since we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so, through Jesus, God will bring with him those who have fallen asleep.
Okay.
For this we declare to you by a word from the Lord, that we who are alive, who are left until the coming of the Lord, will not precede those who have fallen asleep. So he's talking about the resurrection. That's what he's talking about, preceding, and he will bring with him. For the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a cry of command, and with the voice of an archangel, and with the sound of the trumpet of God. The dead in Christ will rise first.
Mm-hmm.
Then we who are alive together will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so we will always be with the Lord. Therefore encourage one another with these words. So that doesn't sound anything like what we just read in Matthew chapter 24. That sounds more like what we read in 1 Corinthians 15.
Yeah, because when it says gathers elect, it says gather, it doesn't say that he's gonna gather us up and meet him in the air.
Right. And so here in 1 Corinthians 15, verse 50, I tell you this, brothers, flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of God, nor does the perishable inherit the imperishable. Behold, I tell you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall be changed in a moment, in a twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet. For the trumpet will sound, and the dead will be raised imperishable, and we shall be changed.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a tie-in where he's talking about at the resurrection, people who haven't died yet are going to be instantaneously changed. Rather than you die, your body goes in the grave, your spirit leaves your body, and then your spirit goes back in your body, and your body is raised to new life and raised imperishable. Rather than that happening for people who are alive, your body will simply be transformed instantly. So both things are going to happen at the same time. But yeah, that's definitely talking about the resurrection, not about the destruction of Jerusalem.
Okay. Okay. Now, what about when it goes? I don't think we got there yet, but when it says Noah.
Oh, right. So
is that about the end of the order, or is that end of Jerusalem? In your opinion?
I think that in this chapter, in this context, Matthew chapter 24, when it's talking about the days of Noah, it's talking about the destruction of the wicked.
Okay.
At the end of history.
So that hasn't came up yet. So this hasn't. Okay.
Yeah.
So this part's future. The rest is past.
Right. Yeah. And as in the days of Noah, the fascinating thing is if you look at the parallel, I think it is in Luke 17. In the days of Noah, it says the flood came and destroyed them all.
Mm-hmm.
And so then when it talks about being taken away by the waters, it's talking about the wicked being taken away in destruction, rather than the righteous being taken away to salvation. So, does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Any other questions?
What about now? I have a question of a similar verse in Revelation 1. Let me flip over there. Actually, no, I'm just going to type it up here. Oh, by the way, you have the Reformation Study Bible?
I used to have one, but I gave it to a friend.
Oh, okay. Okay, it says it's a very similar verse. It says something like when he comes, every eye will see him. I gotta Google it. I forgot where it is.
I think I'll find it right here if I give me a second.
Yeah. Oh,
Behold, he is coming with the clouds, and every eye will see him, even those who pierced him.
Yeah.
And all tribes of the land will wail on account of him.
Okay, so I think that's the same thing. Jerusalem, 70 AD.
Yeah, I think that's the primary focus of the Book of Revelation, and I'm definitely not an expert on the Book of Revelation. Don't even consider myself an expert on Matthew chapter 24, but I have read quite a few discussions about it. So, when it comes to Revelation, there's a lot more apocalyptic, poetic language that's sort of hard to weed through, and even people who are experts say that it's difficult. But I think that's the primary focus, and I think that's even highlighted by verse 1, where it says, "A revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave him to show to his servant the things which must soon take place." So I think that when he says that, and he closes the book with that same sentiment, soon, near, behold, I'm coming quickly, I think he's talking about his coming in judgment upon Israel, particularly the apostate Jews, but rather than at the end of history. But I do think that, particularly in Revelation 20, it stretches out beyond just 70 AD to show us what happens at the end. But does that make sense?
Yeah, because when it says the New Jerusalem, obviously
I think that the New Jerusalem is talking about the church.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Like the new heavens, the new earth? I
think that the new heavens and the new earth is a type and shadow of the consummate creation, but I think that it's the church as well. I think that there's an already not yet aspect of it, just like most amillennialists would say concerning this age and the age to come. I think there's that aspect of the new heavens and new earth as well.
Okay.
Then the reason that I take that view is I go with John Owen's understanding of 2 Peter 3, which is that the destruction of the created order described there was not a literal destruction of the created order, but actually the perishing of the old covenant shadows, and then the emergence of the church in the new covenant. And then I think it's Hebrews chapter 12 talks about, it says, you've not come to, I'll just read it because it's good.
Yeah.
Hebrews 12. So he's actually comparing the Mount Sinai and the giving of the old covenant to the new covenant here, and he says, for you have not come to what may be touched, a blazing fire and darkness and gloom and a tempest, and the sound of a trumpet and a voice whose words make the hearers beg that no further message be spoken to them, for they could not endure the order that was given, if any beast touches the mountain it shall be stoned. Indeed, so terrifying was the sight that Moses said, I tremble with fear. But you have come to Mount Zion, the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, and to innumerable angels in festal gatherings, to the assembly of the firstborn who are enrolled in heaven, and to God, the judge of all, and the spirits of the righteous made perfect, and Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, to the sprinkled blood that speaks better word than the blood of Abel. See that you do not refuse him who is speaking, for they did not escape when they refused him and who were warned on the earth. Much less will we escape if we reject him who warns from heaven. At that time his voice shook the earth, but now he has promised, yet once more I will shake not only the earth but also the heavens. This phrase, yet once more, indicates the removal of things that are shaken, that is, things that have been made, in order that the things that cannot be shaken shall remain. Therefore, let us be grateful for receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken, and let us offer to God acceptable worship with reverence and awe, for our God is a consuming fire. So there he actually says we're in the New Jerusalem right now, the heavenly Jerusalem. That's us.
Because one is not a Jew who's circumcised in the flesh; it's one who's circumcised in the heart.
Exactly.
Like what Paul said in Romans.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite verses of troll dispensationalists with.
It's funny. It's a good one. It's a good one.
Got pointed.
And Revelation's good for that too, because he says, those who call themselves Jews and are not, and that's exactly what Paul's talking about in Romans as well. So, and if you don't have any more questions, we can finish talking about other stuff later. But any more questions about Matthew chapter 24?
This one person who had believed that verses 29-31 happened already in 70 AD, but he interpreted the gathering a little differently. He said that the gathering was Christ taking the elect out of Jerusalem before the armies came and destroyed it. Have you heard that?
Oh, I haven't heard that one, but that would make sense as well, which is true. Because remember how I showed you Luke chapter 21, where it says, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies? Yeah. Fascinating thing is that the Roman armies were marching to Jerusalem to lay siege to it. Mm-hmm. And they surrounded the city, but then they were recalled. And so they surrounded the city and then they left. And after they left, the Jews were mocking them, saying, ha ha ha, you guys losers, get out of here, ha, we hate you. Guess what the Christians did?
They left.
They fled to the mountains of Pella.
Yeah, I read somewhere that
So Jerusalem was literally surrounded by armies, and then the armies pulled back. The Jews stayed and made fun of the Romans, while the Christians left and went to the mountains of Pella. And then, very shortly after the Christians left, the Roman armies turned back around and sacked Jerusalem, burning it to the ground and destroying the temple stone by stone. So that it actually, it legitimately happened exactly like it says, which is fascinating. And I believe Josephus references it and says that, like, just as Jesus told them that the temple would be taken down stone by stone, which is fascinating because he wasn't a Christian, but anyway.
Well, I got some questions about the Noah. When it says, just as was in the days of Noah, just will be the coming of the Son of Man. How do you reconcile that with like a post-millennial view, because
I think that it's talking about the destruction of the consummate destruction of the wicked. So it's not saying that 99.99% of the world will be wicked as it was in the days of Noah. He actually explains what he means by when he says as it was in the days of Noah, and then he describes the wicked being taken away in the flood. Well, that's how the consummation will be as well. The wicked will be taken away by destruction.
Okay, so he's not talking about the wicked to righteous ratio.
Yeah, he's not talking about that at all. He's just talking about the righteous were saved and the wicked perished.
Okay. All right. Well, it says, "For as in those days of flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying, giving in marriage until the day when Noah entered the ark, and they were unaware until the flood came and swept them all away. So will be the coming of the Son of Man. Then
Yeah.
2 men will be in the field, one taken, one left. 2 women will be grinding at the mill, one taking, one left. Therefore stay awake, for you do not know on what day your Lord is coming. But know this, that if the master of the house had known in what part of the night the thief was coming, he would have stayed awake and would not have let his house be broken into. Therefore you also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect." See, one thing I have an issue with that is the day when Noah entered the ark and they all taken away. Noah and his family were like the small minority, and the majority got taken away.
Right, but that's not his point.
Now, how do you know that he's not making that point too?
Because he actually says what his point was. He says, "For as in the days of Noah, so becoming the Son of Man for." In those days before the flood, they were eating and drinking. Who's they? They were eating and drinking and giving in marriage. That's the wicked, until the day when Noah entered the ark, and they were unaware of the flood, and it came and swept them all away. So his point is that in the days of Noah heeded the warning, and he was saved.
Mm-hmm.
The wicked did not heed the warning and kept on living their lives, and they perished.
Yeah.
That's his point.
Well, then again, that seems to make that seems to actually confirm the view I'm trying to make, because the wicked were just keep on doing wicked, and they weren't repenting, and they don't go in the ark except for Noah and his family. Then they all get taken away in the flood.
Right, but if you try to draw too many parallels, then you have a problem, because God says he'll never destroy the world by water again.
Well, yeah, like
so if it's going to be as it was in the days of Noah, God can't do that because he promised that he wouldn't.
Yeah, like
it must be something other than you have to understand which parallel he's drawing.
Yeah, like I understand that, but we definitely know that because the rainbow, like the sign of the rainbow, it meant he's not going to flood the earth, but I think he'll destroy the earth by fire.
Right, and I don't think that he's actually going to destroy the earth by fire. I think that means he's going to destroy the wicked, not the actual planet.
Yeah, because I think you said that you didn't actually think 2 Peter 3 meant he was going to destroy the world.
Yeah, I don't think that's talking about the destruction of the created order, because it doesn't make sense to me that God would create the world and then save people but abandon the planet. Like, if he actually reverses the curse, why would he redeem our bodies but not redeem the earth?
Maybe he thinks of redeeming as destroying and making a new one.
But that's not what he does with our bodies. The redemption of your soul is not the destruction of your soul and the creation of a new one. The redemption of your body is not the destruction of your body and the creation of a new one. So why would the redemption of creation be the destruction of it and the creation of a new one? I think it's a transformation, but I don't think it's a destruction. I think that it's a purging of the wickedness, but I think it's the wicked who are actually destroyed by fire, not the creation itself. So.
And what do you think about what verse 35 means then? Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. It seems like it's implying that this current world will pass away.
Right, but the term "pass away" doesn't mean cease to exist.
Well, what does it mean by? Well, what does?
It just means to be. It just means to have gone by, to be old and out of, to be forgotten.
Okay.
Let me see if I can find some parallels for you with that.
All right. Well, according to my lexicon I'm using, it passed the name Pare. I don't know.
Strong's G 3928. Parechomai. Parechomai.
Pawerkamai, or what the hell? How
Oh, Pamerkamai, yeah.
Okay, so to go past, pass by, persons moving forward, to pass by on time, and act continuing for time, to pass away, perish, to pass by, pass over, that is to neglect, omit, transgress.
Yeah. So when it says this generation will not pass away, he's not saying this generation will not be annihilated, destroyed, and decreated. He's saying this generation won't die. So when he's saying that heaven and earth will pass away, he's not saying that heaven and earth will cease to exist. He's saying that the heaven and earth that is will die, just like our body dies and is then afterward regenerated, just like our soul was regenerated at our new birth, right? Our body will be regenerated. So I think the earth will be regenerated as well.
Okay, yeah. Okay. Okay, well, that seems like almost the same thing as what I'm saying, but alright. That's fine. Yeah, I think that's all the questions I have for Matthew 24. I can't really. Actually,
Cool.
wait. There's one thing actually. I got the. This is the Reformation Study Bible with R.C. Sproul.
Yeah.
The notes in 29 to 31, 24, 29 to 31. This is a note says, some have understood these verses represent the defeat of Satan's forces, the Son of Man's vindication, and the spread of the gospel to all the world, as having occurred symbolically at the destruction of Jerusalem. But the language of verse 31 is parallel to passages like Matthew 13:41, 16:27, and 25:31, as well as to passages such as 1 Corinthians 15:52 and 1 Thessalonians 4:14 and 17. The passage most naturally refers to the second coming. So, and also that another thing that's gathered, I actually looked at this last night. 13:41 is from the parable of the wheat and tares.
Right.
And it says that the wicked were gathered and thrown in the furnace.
Right, but if you actually look at what he's talking about when he says gathered and thrown into a furnace, he's actually referring to the illustration of the tares being gathered into bundles, which again is not a vertical gathering but a horizontal gathering.
Okay.
So it's like I'm taking all of the tares and I'm putting them in a bundle. That's the gathering, right, into one, right?
Okay, so how do you know if that's a vertical gathering, but Matthew 24 is a horizontal gathering? So there. Looks frozen. Are you still there? Oh.
Does that make sense? Yeah, I'm still here.
No, could you repeat that because it froze and I didn't hear anything?
Yeah. So the gathering in Matthew 13 is referring not to the wheat not to the tares being pulled out up into heaven, right? But the gathering is after you've taken them out, putting them into bundles. That's what the gathering's referring to. So he's not actually saying that the wicked are being gathered like the righteous are being gathered. It's not a parallel in that sense. It's just that the word gather means this way. He's actually using the illustration of gathering the tares to say that as the tares will be gathered in the bundles and thrown in the fire, so the wicked will be destroyed. Does that make sense?
Okay, so the tares get gathered vertically, but the
horizontally, not vertically.
Oh, tares are horizontally.
Yeah,
okay,
because when you gather tares, that's not pulling them out. That's not what gathering is. The gathering is once you've pulled them out, putting them into a bundle. Horizontal gathering.
Oh yeah, kind of like in Matthew 25, where it says separate the goats and the sheep.
Exactly.
Okay, yeah, that actually kind of makes sense now I think about it. Was it the sheep on the right or goats on the left, or am I mixing it up?
Yeah, something like that.
Something like that, yeah. So okay, so yeah, right and left. So that's horizontal. Yeah, that makes sense. If right and left is horizontal. Okay, I can get that.
Cool.
Right. Okay. Yeah. And I also have John Calvin's commentary. Would you like to hear his commentary on verse 31?
Sure. He was a historicist, so I know his interpretation is going to be a little bit different, but go for it.
Yeah, I think according to Dr. Gentry says he was post-millennial. Like, his views were more closer post-millennial as today.
Some of his views, yeah. Not all of them, but yes. Like, he believed that at one point in time the ratio of righteous to unrighteous would be 5-1.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
He definitely was not.
Read his commentary on Isaiah 19, I think it is, and you can pull up Gentry's articles from postmillennialismtoday.com.
Is it Gentry or Gentry?
I think it's Gentry, but
okay, like a J. Okay, I thought it was a G. Like
it is a G, but I think it's pronounced like a J.
Okay, all right. It says verse 31, and he shall send his angels. He describes the effect of his power, that he will send his angels to gather his elect from the most distant parts of the world. For by the extremity of heaven is meant the most distant region. But Christ speaks hyperbolically in order to show that the elect, even though they were carried away from the earth and scattered in the air, will again be gathered, so to be united in the enjoyment of eternal life under him as a head, enjoy the expected inheritance, for Christ intended to console his disciples, that they might not be altogether discouraged by the lamentable dispersion of the church. Whenever, therefore, we perceive the church scattered by the wiles of Satan, or torn to pieces by the cruelty of the ungodly, or disturbed by false doctrines, or tossed about by storms, let us learn to turn our eyes to the gathering of the elect. And if it appear to us a thing difficult to be believed, let us call to remembrance the power of the angels, which Christ holds out to us for the express purpose of raising our views above human means. For though the church be now tormented by the malice of men, or even broken by the violence of the billows, and miserably torn in pieces, so as to have no stability in the world, yet we ought always to cherish confident hope, because it will not be by human means, but by heavenly power, which will be far superior to every obstacle, that the Lord will gather his church. So it sounds saying what you've been saying, that it's talking about Christ gathering his church or evangelizing the elect.
Say that last part one more time.
Last part of the commentary.
What you just said.
Oh, okay. It sounds like it's saying what you were saying, like Calvin saying that it's Christ gathering the elect, like evangelizing.
Yeah.
Doesn't it sound? I think
he actually sees it. He actually sees it that referring also to the gathering of elect into one at the consummation, I believe.
Okay.
But I think it's a little bit of both. So.
Oh yeah, and that's another thing I remember. Remember when I did on the Reform Pub? I wanted to make a poll. I did like a Ask question poll and said, "What do you think?" Matthew 24, 29 of 31 is talking about. You think it's the second coming? You remember me doing that poll? Did you see it?
I didn't see that one. No.
Okay. Well, I made a poll. I said, "All right, do you think it's the second coming? Do you think it happened in 70 AD?" Then I wrote other, explaining comments, or add a new option.
Mm-hmm.
And someone added a new option that said both. Like
yeah.
I thought it's referring to 70 AD and the parousia, or the resurrection. What do you think the people that think it was both?
I think that it makes sense according to their interpretive framework. I just disagree. I think that it's clearly talking about the destruction of Jerusalem. But if you're going to admit that it's talking about the destruction of Jerusalem, then we can agree at least on that part. If you're going to say that it's also talking about the destruction at the end of history, then we'll just disagree on that point. So.
And another thing is, you probably didn't see this one because I don't think you're in this group, but in the amillennialism group, I did that poll too because I wanted to see, and this amillennial that had your views regarding your preterist views regarding this, he said that, I think I actually said this earlier, that he believes that it was he believed that it was Christ taking the elect out of Jerusalem, and I also had and it also had a few people that believed it was both. Like, they said that what happened in 70 AD is kind of like a sign or kind of like a microcosm of what happens at the
Yeah.
end of the world.
Microcosm of the macrocosm at the end of history. Yeah, that's a common idealist recapitulation theory.
Yeah, I think.
Well, I think we can wrap it up here pretty in just a minute. If you want to connect with us on Facebook, we have discussions like this on Eschatology Debate is the name of the group. Also, if you want to connect with me on Twitter, my Twitter handle, the new one, is Theonomy Thon. That's like the Reverse Flash. Thank you, Calvinist Batman, for that superhero nickname. And yeah, so see you guys.
All right.